I have invented a whole new training system that is really unusual and works incredibly well to fit your training or fit my training around the complexities of modern life without having to fit your life around your training. What makes this training system so unusual is that it doesn't focus on any of the specifics of your training. So this system, let's call it, accepts that there are many ways to gain fitness. You could do lots of easy running or a little bit of hard running or a mix. You could do pyramidal, you could do polarized, you could do all these different systems. And actually they all work to achieve the same fundamental goal of improving your, fitness, aerobic systems, oxygen efficiency, like all of these wonderful things that improve performance. But there are many, many ways to do that. This training system allows you to achieve those gains in whatever way suits you. So it doesn't nail in on the specifics and it looks at really abstract, big picture stuff to project your training forwards and gain you fitness. And that means that the training system is super flexible and very different to other training systems because within a week, the training system works by setting you a training load target each week. So Monday to Monday is how I do my weeks. And on Monday, I wake up and the training system has given me a target, a training load target to achieve that week. And it's totally up to me about how I go about achieving that training load target. I can do, as I usually like to do on my normal weeks, lots of easy running, evenly distributed across the week. So I would train usually every day, sometimes multiple times per day, doing all of my running at a chatting pace, pretty easy chatting pace, and just clock up a big distance with very little variation. I'm a pretty boring person in that way, I guess. But if I got different things going on, let's say I'm on holiday, I might be more pushed for time, for example, or have to train in different ways. So if I'm on holiday somewhere really hilly, I might go and do a bunch of hill sprints. And although that's a very different way of achieving that training load goal, this system quantifies exactly the value of those hill sprints compared to the value of a longer, slower run. And it matches those two things and goes, okay, those were both worth X or Y, and you have to do A or B in order to meet that training load goal at the end of the week. One of the things that I love about this system is that by daisy chaining all of these weeks together, you can be completely confident in the fitness you have going into your race. So as I say, I'm a marathon runner at heart, but actually the training system, by the way, works for all different distances, all the way from kind of 3K up to ultra distances. But let's talk about marathon running because that's where my background is. When I do a marathon, there is no question about what shape I'm in going into the marathon. Whether I can execute it to that shape or not is a different question. But really all you're doing on the start line of your marathon is collecting the result that you've earned in training. And that for me it's just a game changer. It's a paradigm shift because the amount of my friends at my running club or runners that I meet who they're lining up on a marathon start line and they're going, I don't know, I'm aiming for sub 3, but I'm not really sure what shape I'm in. I'm going to go out at sub 3 shape and hopefully hold on. No, like if you're doing that, if that's what you're saying on the start line, then you've missed the trick. And the trick is you've got to know what shape you're in. And it doesn't make the marathon any easier to achieve because you're still operating right at your limit, but it means that you're able to get the most out of yourself on the day because you know what fitness you're in. It's the same training system, but when you view it over many weeks and months or 1 week, it has different effects on how you can use it. You can use it in different ways to achieve different things. And that's really unusual. I don't know of anything else that does the same thing. The problem with focusing on the specifics and the benefit of abstracting away and focusing on the big picture is that although much of the specifics is very easy to measure very precisely, you can measure distance and time and therefore pace very accurately with modern GPS watches, the noise in the system, let's say, is actually really big. So how you're feeling, if you're predicting your race performance from, let's say, a VO2 max test in training, the variation in how you perform in that VO2 max test in training on a day-to-day basis is really high. So the predictive power of that test for your race in 4 weeks' time is really affected by how you're feeling on that day. Whereas if you're looking at the big picture of training, then you're able to smooth out all of that noise and go, well, this is the total training load I've been able to achieve. And actually, if there have been some factors in your life that mean the only noise that affects that big picture are things that also affect the race, because inherently the training you've done is the thing that dictates the race performance. So let's dig into a VO2 max test. Only about a third of people, even when they do a VO2 max test in the lab with a doctor or sports scientist or physiologist next to them, get a accurate measure of their VO2 max. And that is because to do a true VO2 max test, you need to do what's called a ramp test. So you start off running slowly and you measure oxygen consumption. You have a mask on and you measure oxygen consumption at a slow pace, and you gradually increase your pace, spending a few minutes at each intensity level so that the oxygen consumption is steady state, and you increase that intensity until you're actually going above your aerobic threshold. And to actually get above your aerobic threshold is really hard, really hard to do. So even with a doctor or physiologist shouting encouragement at you, only about a third of people are actually able to get all the way to beyond aerobic. So if only a third of people are able to do that in a lab setting, what does that mean for being able to do your VO2 max test on a track by yourself with your watch? It can only be worse than 1 in 3 people getting an accurate reading. And there's a whole bunch of other things that affect the accuracy of that test. So even though you can measure your heart rate pretty accurately with a good heart rate monitor and your distance and pace pretty accurately, you're also affected by heaps of other things. But those things don't matter when you zoom out and look at the really big picture. And that means that you can be way more accurate at predicting race performance when you look at big picture stuff rather than focusing in on the real specifics. Yeah, and although I say that the specifics don't matter, of course, to some degree, the specifics do matter. Your race day fitness is a product of a whole bunch of really specific systems having achieved really specific training adaptations. And it's not that those specific training adaptations don't matter, they absolutely do. What I'm saying is that you can achieve those specific training adaptations in many different ways, and you don't need to perform a specific intervention training session in order to achieve a specific adaptation. So let's put an example on this. When you go and do, or I go and do, a lactate threshold session, and I put that in quotes on purpose, because unless you're actually measuring lactate turn point, it's really hard to be exercising at the right intensity. But let's say you are exercising at the right intensity and you're doing a lactate threshold session. You're not just training that specific physiological system of your lactate threshold, you're training a whole heap of other things as well. So you're achieving training effects that you don't realize you're achieving. Your fitness is made up of all of these specific systems. So you do your lactate threshold session, and you're also training your sweat glands, you're training your biomechanics, you're training your skeletal muscle, you're training your heart size, you're training all of these other things, not just the specific adaptation you set out to train. So whether you do specific interventions to target specific systems, or you just do a all training is training approach, they both have the same goal of, at the end of the day, training all of your systems. And crucially, there are more systems than you could possibly understand, probably dozens of systems contributing to race day fitness, and all of them need to be trained. If you line up on the marathon start line and you had only trained your lactate threshold when you were doing your lactate threshold sessions, that wouldn't be enough, because you also need the biomechanics, the blood volume, the sweat glands, all of those other things also need to be trained. And you are doing that when you do your specific interventions, but you're also doing that when you do generalized training. So maybe a bit of background about me. I am a runner at heart, but I haven't always been a runner. I started my, let's say, endurance sport journey when I was a child doing triathlons. I was never very good at triathlons as a child. I was distinctly in the also-ran category, but I did then move on to marathons when I was 17, did my first marathon when I was 17. I did my first marathon very badly at that age. I didn't realize that training mattered, so I very much took an approach of doing no training and a lot of training in the last few weeks. And that was a 3:24 marathon. I think I set off at about 3:15 pace, hit the wall hard at kilometer 32, maybe something like that, probably a bit earlier than that, and really struggled. I was on the struggle bus all the way to the end there. So really a classic first marathon story there. And that was before so 3:24 before I was studying, and then I started to study physiology and realized the importance of training, which seems like a phenomenally obvious realization to come to, but I can tell you it wasn't obvious for me at the time. But then I started to do a sports science and physiology degree, and in that degree, in that process, I was kind of using myself as a lab rat to do to test my learnings on and getting better at doing training and therefore racing. And along that journey of looking, understanding sports science, understanding physiology, and becoming a better runner in tandem, I came across some really interesting science, which was the first version, the first jumping off point for this original system, which was coincidentally a research paper that investigated marathon performance in relation to training indices. And we've moved on a long way from there. It's not just marathon performance, and we do more studies of more different training indices now. And then I jumped down about 20 minutes to kind of 306, 303, hovered around there for a while not really finding my feet with how I wanted to train. I was not part of that traditional club running system, but more doing my own thing, coaching myself, but kind of without a direction. And then when I came across this original research paper that investigated marathon performance, I thought, wow, well, this makes training so much simpler because you don't need to focus on any of these specifics. And I just thought, well, let's see what happens if I just keep pushing that button, see if we can take this equation to the nth degree. And I did, and I jumped another 20-minute gain down to about a 2:42 in my next race. So it was like two big steps, one from 3.5 hours down to about 3 hours, realizing that training mattered, and one from about 3 hours to about 2:40, realizing that how you could train successfully, not just that training mattered, but specifically how to train optimally. So the way that I was training before realizing, before my jump down to about 2:40, the way that I was training before the jump down to about 2:40 was very unstructured, but crucially also I wasn't tracking things. Although I think I had a GPS watch. GPS watches were quite new at the time, and I wasn't making use of mine. I think I was probably still running with a Casio, one of the old Casio kind of stopwatchy type watches. I wasn't tracking anything. I wasn't logging anything or following the real basics of kind of progressive overload and gradually building up your training. I wasn't doing anything either targeted or with any particular purpose. So I would just go out and hit the road for, whatever, 10 or 20 kilometers, but I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you how far I was running because I wasn't even logging it. It was probably 50 kilometers a week or so, maybe 70 kilometers a week, but who knows? Also very sporadic within a week. So I might go out and do a longer run, 2 hours at the weekend, and then not run for 3 days, which I've now come to realize not the optimum strategy for me. I need to do little and often. And after this kind of directionless training, it was specifically the discovery of this paper that opened my eyes to the possibility of actually becoming quite good at running. So I was, 3.5 hours, 3 hours in the marathon is not bad at all, but also you're not winning races with those times. And I'd done lots of different sports in my youth and been terrible at some and okay at others, but never really excelled. And the idea that you could just take an equation and get the basics down without any real skill, and as wiser people than me have said, science the shit out of the marathon. You don't need to be cool, you don't need to be talented, you can just keep hammering that button and get really quite good at it. I thought that really appeals to me. So I really clearly remember one spring thinking, okay, let's see how far I can take this. I'm going to try and actually be good, really good at a sport for the first time in my life and take it really seriously. And of course, that didn't mean that I was not, socializing and doing all the normal things that a teenager does or a lad in their early 20s does, but I was definitely also training quite seriously back then. And And it worked. My times were coming down and down and down, and that gave me more and more and more motivation to see how far I could push that equation. And this research paper was really just saying that the best way to predict race performance, fitness and race performance are one of the same here. The best way to predict race performance is simply to look at someone's total training distance and average training pace in the weeks and months leading up to their race. And what that says is that you can achieve fitness and a PB either by training long and slow, by doing 200 kilometers a week at 5 minutes a kilometer, or by going short and fast, maybe 100 kilometers a week at 4 minutes a kilometer. I've just plucked those numbers out of air, so don't hold me to those numbers, but you see what I'm saying? There's this wonderful curve you can create that is pace on one axis and distance on the other axis, and you can trade distance for pace. What I specifically found was that it takes me quite a long time to recover from a hard run, a fast run, but I can recover quite quickly from running a long way. So what I can do is just run a long way really often, and that gets me the same training benefit as doing a much harder session that I could only do infrequently. So I thought, okay, let's see how far I can take this. And I was then running 18 kilometers to work as my commute, and 18 kilometers home from work, 36 kilometers a day, 5 days a week, and then just topping it up over the weekend. And that was some of the most enjoyable training I ever did, because I just woke up, jogged to work, cleared my head, did a day's work, jogged home, nobody around, an 18-kilometer jog through the countryside. It was super nice and gave me a phenomenal training benefit. And I was able to do that every day because I wasn't spending myself. I wasn't overcooking myself by running hard. And so this original research paper looked at the prediction of race performance from these training indices, but you can also view this the other way around. And we touched on this earlier by breaking this down into 1 week chunks or into 2-month block. And if rather than saying, okay, here's the training I've done, so what race prediction are we going to give me? What fitness do I have? You can flip that on its head and say, in order to achieve a certain race prediction, what does my training need to look like? So you can say, well, I know that my race goal is, let's say, a 2:30 marathon, and I'm currently in 3-hour marathon shape, because I can look at my training at the moment and say, right, I've got a 3-hour prediction and I want to get a 2:30 prediction, and I know what training I need to do to get there. I know what my training needs to look like there, and I can map a journey from one to the other. I can just say, okay, I've got 16 weeks to do it. So I'm currently training like a 3-hour runner. Next week, I need to train like a 2:55 runner. Week after that, I need to train like a 2:45 runner, whatever. I need to build this staircase for myself up to fitness. And each week I can create that training block wherever I want within the week. And as long as by the end of the week, I know that I have trained like a 5 runner, and then next week like a 250 runner, I know that by the time race day rolls around, my training has been, well, I've trained like a 230 runner for the last 8 weeks. So I know by race day, I'm in 230 shape. And this isn't just holistically in my head, but I built a wonderful spreadsheet for myself. So this was back in the early days, before things were being imported automatically between different services. I was finishing my run and adding the distance, time, heart rate, a few other things into a big Excel sheet and plotting some graphs to plot my fitness and giving myself a score each day for how I had trained. So I just basically had a huge spreadsheet, thousands and thousands of lines with all of my training data in it that was telling me what I needed to do. And it was saying, okay, well, here's the training you've done so far this week. Here's the gap you need to make up between today and the end of the week. And this worked by, initially, I had a graph that had my projected or my desired gain in fitness and my actual gain in fitness, and the goal for actually in version 0 of this spreadsheet every single day, because I was training every single day. My goal was to improve my fitness by the small amount needed to keep my real training line, my real fitness line above the projected fitness. But in reality, working day by day is not super practical, because if you're off by one day, you have to, in your own head, work out how to bridge the gap over the next few days. A better way to think about it, because we in the modern world mostly work on a 7-day system, is to work on a 7-day cycle. So then I was projecting, okay, this is the training load you need to achieve for a given week. And I presented that as a donut graph, as a ring graph. And I would fill the donut with each run I did in the week, progressively adding to this donut plot. And when the donut is full, then you can kick back and you're done for the week, basically. And I found that to be a really motivating way of training. And it was so motivating. Other people obviously agreed, because 10 years later, it's still the core piece of this training system. So at the time, I was planning my week by penciling in a run, as if I had done it, and seeing what effects that would have, and then deleting the row in the spreadsheet. Remember, this is all manual, although I am recording on a GPS watch nowadays. I've ditched the old Casio and I've got myself a original Garmin Forerunner. It's still really manual. I'm finishing the run, typing the details into the spreadsheet, mocking up some pretend runs, seeing what effect that'll have, and then being sure that that'll get me to my goal. But that's, again, a very manual process of typing in some theoretical data, seeing what effect that'll have, and then deleting that theoretical data, because you don't want to lie to yourself. You don't want to give yourself the reward before you've actually done the run. Yeah, and that took me version 0 of that spreadsheet. And version 0 of that spreadsheet actually managed to take me from about 3 hours to about 240 pretty successfully. And in fact, I really remember that 240 run. Thought that perhaps I'd gone the wrong way on the course, because I was in so much better shape than I expected to be. I was so much faster than I expected. I thought I might have gone the wrong way, but I hadn't. I was in way better fitness than I had realized. And that's version 0 of the spreadsheet. Version 1 of the spreadsheet takes me another leap forward to more like a 230, although it was more incremental. It was 237, 235, 233, and then 228 across 2 years or so. So that was a harder journey, because it is a much harder journey. Each minute in marathon time takes more effort to shave off than the previous minute. So smaller jumps, but more satisfying jumps, because I was able to refine this system, train more effectively, maybe not training more efficiently, because it's not about being more efficient, it's about being more effective and reliable and consistent. So I was spending more time training, getting less training value from every minute, but by training slower, I was able to race much faster. And actually, that was one of the best marathons I ever did. I was just a huge PB. It was a 20-minute PB, the first time I'd ever gone under 3 hours. And I remember being just phenomenally pleased. I was stoked. This is all pre-carbon shoes as well pre-carbon shoes. So I was even more pleased with it and I think the thing that really fueled training, that got me from 3 hours to 240, and let's not forget that it's not the race day performance. All you're doing there is collecting the result you earned in training. You have to pay for that result in hours spent training in the weeks and months beforehand. And what motivated all of that hard work was the really direct link between doing a run and seeing the effect that run has on my fitness. So you are only able to improve your fitness by training. You're not improving your fitness by thinking about training or by analyzing your training afterwards, as fun as that is. The only way you can get that dopamine hit of, oh, the graph's gone up, is by getting outside and doing a run. And for me, I found that really direct link between you do a run and you know exactly what effects that's had on your fitness. I found that super motivating. For me, version 0 of a spreadsheet where I could do a run, type in a number and see the line go up, I was on fire. And I think on that wonderfully motivating note, that's time to wrap it up here for today. I hope you've enjoyed our first episode. I will be back next time for the journey of how I went from a 240 marathon runner to a 230 marathon runner. And that is maybe version 1 of the spreadsheet. And we're going to go into more detail. It's going to be brilliant. See you next time.